Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another webinar in the series brought to you by Humanity First United Kingdom. Just to let you know before we start, today you can participate in this live event via your Slido app, or you can participate via slido.com, and the code will be shown on your screen. So without further ado, it is midday in New York in the States, 5 p.m. here in London, and today we are going to present to you Professor Amr Sharif, who is Professor of the Circular Economy and is also the Associate Dean at the University of Bradford here in the United Kingdom. Professor Sharif's worked extensively in the financial services and professional services sector. He's worked and is consulted for many of the world's leading multinationals, including JP Morgan, UBS, KPMG, BAE, Sony, as well as the BBC. His key teaching and research interests cover a wide, diverse range, including food security, food waste, the food, energy, water nexus, and importantly for today, the circular economy. He's very widely published in many international peer-reviewed journals, and today, hopefully, we will benefit from his insight into this hugely important subject, particularly during the current crisis that we face. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Amr Sharif, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafiz Aziz, and delighted to be here this afternoon with you all. I hope you can all see me, you can all hear me, and I hope you're all, of course, safe and well at this very challenging time in the world. And this topic is, as mentioned in the introduction there, it's a very interesting, very relevant subject at the moment. Of course, it brings together two key words which we're experiencing at the moment, clearly COVID, clearly the pandemic crisis, as well as the other word there in the title of this talk, which is economy. And we can't really ignore the impact of one on the other because they go hand in hand. And many of you might not know what the circular economy is. In fact, for those of you who've got a very clear camera shot, you might be able to see there's a book behind me there, which is on the circular economy. But as mentioned as well at the beginning of this talk, I want to make this actually a very interactive session if I can, and if it's possible. And as you've got it there on the bottom of the screen, I want us to use, and I want you to use actually Slido, an app called Slido, and enter in code R622, that is R622, and participate in 2 or 3 polls that I'll be running as we run through this session and talk. And I'll let you know when those polls are live. In fact, the first poll is live right now. And the question I have for you all there is, what do you understand by the term circular economy? Now, of course, if I was in class or if I was with you in person, we would have an interactive session, and actually we would discuss this in a bit more detail. But please feel free to post your questions on Slido and give me your thoughts about what you think the circular economy is. Not everybody knows what is this strange phrase. I mean, what is circular about a circular economy? So please go to Slido, code R622, and enter in your thoughts. If preferable, if you could just use one keyword, that would be great. Then it will generate for you, and it will hopefully be able to see, and we can share that later on as well, what they call a word cloud of different words and prominent phrases that come up here. So thank you for that, and we'll carry on. I have a question though for you as well. So I normally do this. I normally ask students and companies lots of questions. By the way, I don't have any answers. I only have more questions. So I'm going to ask you a question here and think about what the answer could be. Okay, you ready? So here's a question. What do the numbers 4, 5, and 6 have in relation to the numbers 3, 2, and 1? Okay, what do the numbers 4, 5, and 6 have in common with the numbers 3, 2, and 1? And by the time we get to the end of the talk, hopefully I will tell you what the answer is to that little riddle there. But just to go back to the beginning, and let's talk about the situation we're in right now. Clearly, we're in a global pandemic, a lockdown situation. Many countries now, such as the UK, today, for example, are slowly coming out of a lockdown situation. And the challenge that we've got is a global one. It's probably the single most unifying feature of our world at the moment, in lots of different forms. But before I carry on with that, I'd like us to think about how we view the world. And one very prominent fellow professor, who's sadly no longer with us, but was key in developing the idea of thinking in systems. Jay Forrester from MIT once said that the world that we understand is actually not necessarily in front of us, it's actually in our heads. And the way we think about the world and how we interact with the world is totally dependent upon how we view it. And that's really important because that is how we interact with each other, that's how we solve problems, that is how we go about our day-to-day lives. And a situation like COVID and the pandemic situation we've got right now is quite challenging for all of us. So how do we deal with that? And how do we bring together ideas of economics, ideas of healthcare, so on and so forth in this very complex situation? There's another quote I'd like to share with you, or thinking from a very prominent Armenian philosopher, G.I. Gurdjieff, and he's one of my favorite philosophers. He was around the turn of the century, and he said something very profound. He said that everything is connected to everything else. No single thing is separate, and smaller things, if they exist to serve something bigger. And this really means that we're living in a connected society. We're living in a connected world. And with something like COVID and the global pandemic, and indeed economies and healthcare systems and food systems, we really are seeing that everything is totally connected. We can't separate things. So I'd like you to keep those ideas in your mind, first of all. And what we're dealing with here in terms of COVID is a very strange problem. It's strange because it's not really solvable. It's not a problem as such. It's not even a puzzle. Puzzles and problems can be solved because we might know what the answer is. With COVID, unfortunately, this is something new. It's a new challenge for humanity. And therefore, it's what we call it's a mess. It's a wicked problem, which has no beginning, really, in several ways. And we hope it has some end, but we don't know where to start with it. So we're living in this complex world. We're living in this complex environment. And there are lots of different factors that are impinging upon our world, apart from COVID, and have been beforehand as well. Economic crises, which have come and gone, technology disruption, and the emergence of new types of technology, the effect of our impact upon the planet, and the so-called climate crisis. We can't ignore that. And even political and geopolitical challenges and issues, conflicts, but also political and regional instabilities. Here in the UK, we're very used to, and we have been very used to, thinking and talking about Brexit. And just because we have COVID doesn't mean that Brexit and some other things disappear. They're still very much there. So we're living in this world where there's a whole bunch of issues that are connected and are always impacting upon each other. How can we actually deal with that? Coming back to the issue of climate change and climate crisis, this is perhaps the single biggest shadow behind COVID and the global pandemic at the moment. We will still have to deal with the climate challenge. How do we do that? And the circular economy, in one way, in fact many ways, as I will explain, might be a way to solve that particular challenge as well. One thing that I'm always asked when I mention that I'm interested in the circular economy is people automatically say, well, you must be an economist. Actually, I'm not an economist by training. I'm an engineer by first training. But the economy part of the circular economy is quite interesting because it is about not so much economics, it's actually about how things flow. And in an economy, we have flows of money, we have flows of capital, we have flows of resources. And we know that in any system, and certainly in any economic system, the economic system that we've grown up with and humanity has had over many, many centuries, always produces goods and services and provides them to consumers. Now, that particular system has been working very well for many, many years, except we know that it produces waste. It produces a lot of unintended consequences, such as food waste, plastic waste, pollution, and other impacts upon the environment. So how do we deal with that? How do we get beyond that? So the traditional methods and models of economics are fine, and they've served us very well. And having worked in financial institutions for a part of my life, I can certainly say that they are very, very efficient and effective. But we have to get beyond that. We have to come to a point where we look at the consequences of our consumption. We have to look at the consequences of the way we produce goods and services and look at how that's infecting our environment, but actually look for innovations that might improve our economic system as well. So the circular economy and the concept of a circular economy is about flows. The circular economy concept of a circular economy is actually about reducing waste, and it's very much a zero waste strategy, or it's a zero waste approach. So we want to actually mitigate those things as much as possible within the idea of a circular economy. And the roots of a circular economy and the idea of a circular economy is nothing new. This is an idea that's an overnight idea that's actually been around with us for at least 40 years, if not 50 years. So it has its roots in related concepts such as biomimicry, such as industrial ecology, and some of those topics are really interesting, but far too detailed to go into this afternoon. But the ideas are very simple. The ideas of optimizing the way we use products and services, making sure that we don't waste valuable assets, be they minerals, be they water, be they food, be they energy. The point is not to make waste. And the point is also to reuse and recirculate value as much as possible. Now, in terms of how this works out in relation to research that's being done and activities that are being done at the University of Bradford, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of teaching the circular economy as well as researching in the circular economy for several years now, working in partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and lots of other corporate organizations and NGOs. And that's now been developed very well. And there's lots more to be developed, of course, in relation to that. But the idea that is there within the circular economy is to look at how we can balance the natural world, the assets in the natural world, with the assets in the man-made world, the so-called technosphere. And for companies, this is a real challenge. And even for households, it's a real challenge. I'm sure you'll all agree we'd like to continue with the lifestyles that we have. But we have to continue to also think about the impact and consequences of our consumption patterns. I'm sure you will all have seen during COVID and during lockdown, for those of you who have been, for example, you may have been ordering things online, there's a huge amount of packaging waste. And certainly, if we look in terms of a household, how much cardboard, how much plastic is now being produced? All the PPE, very vital PPE equipment, plastic-based PPE equipment, gloves, visors, that's all made from largely polymer material. Now, I hope that the majority of that polymer-based material is recyclable, can be reused, but there might be a majority of a certain portion of it which might not be reusable or recyclable. And we've seen many things in the press about the impact of COVID on schemes to reduce plastic waste, and sort of that's gone out the window, quite literally. So the circular economy is trying to get us to think about the consequences and the impacts of our actions. And I think, just coming back to the poll that I've got, there's been some responses, so thank you for that. I'm going to release another question in a moment. In fact, I'm going to release it right now. If that's working, I'll do that now. And I'm keen to find out what people think in terms of what are the key issues facing the world at the moment. I've already mentioned a few of them, but I'm going back to the beginning of what I said in terms of the world is as we see it. And one person's problem might be another person's solution. So if you go along to Slido, code R622, hopefully you'll be able to answer the next sort of question I have for you there, and I'd be keen to see your responses. Now, the thing is about the circular economy, it's not that well known as a concept, and hopefully, if you're joining this call and this session, you might be trying to work out, well, what is a circular economy? Actually, the goal of a circular economy is for there to be no such thing as a circular economy. We just want there to be an economy, okay? And the ultimate goal is to remove that word circular. And circularity, just to repeat and to refresh what that means, is a way of literally circulating assets, circulating valuable goods and commodities so that we don't actually waste them. Now, many years ago here in the UK, but certainly in other parts of the world where it's still done, we used to see, and we still might see, people who may scavenge or may reuse and come to your house and take unwanted items and reuse them and fix them. Now, over the years, that idea has become unfashionable because it might be seen as, being dirty or being unprofitable, for example. However, there is some method and scheme in that approach of reusing and repairing things. You're not spending more money, for a start, but it's not just about money, but you're actually not wasting the value within a product. So that's important when we consider highly sophisticated technological items, like, for example, things like smartphones, okay? Very, very complicated devices which have got lots and lots of materials and resources in them. But if we throw them away, what's going to happen then? It's going to create waste, and we're losing value, more importantly. So if you're a company, you don't want that value to be wasted. And that's the point of a circular economy. Now, there are many other types of economy or economic concept which you may have heard about. For example, things like the blue economy, which seeks to increase innovation in local communities, or the donut economy, which seeks to come up with an idea about, again, how we live in this world and how we seek to preserve our natural resources and not to exploit them. There's even things like the gig economy. And how many of us, and you don't have to put your hand up because I can't see you, how many of us use services like Uber or Deliveroo or Just Eat? These are all gig economy type businesses and operations whereby customers are put directly in touch with the people who can provide the services. So there's lots and lots of different types of economy out there. But the circular economy, in terms of the pandemic and in terms of COVID, is perhaps an opportunity. It's perhaps not so much a solution, but a way of building better. And there's an initiative out there at the moment. There's several initiatives that I just want to tell you about, which relate to using business ideas, economic ideas like the circular economy to improve our world, to improve our system. So I'm going to give you a few names here, and you can look these up by all means, and we can also share this with you. So things like Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown seeks to look at how we can reduce emissions from some of our leading corporate and business sectors. We've got other things such as Build Back in the UK. The Build Back initiative is a really unique idea, and I'm not necessarily an advocate for it, but it's a really fantastic innovation in that the Build Back campaign is about making the health system and the community system and our overall environmental system, linking them all up so that we have a better world. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we're in a really special moment at the right now as a planet. We are all sharing a singular challenge, and I think whenever you speak to anybody, certainly when I speak to family and friends around the world, we are always talking about the same thing. How are you? I hope you're well. I hope you're safe. Do you have access to food? Do you have access to energy and water? Is your job secure? And a whole bunch of other things, apart from perhaps getting a haircut as well, or going out. But we're all sharing. The point is we're all sharing, and we're all part of a global challenge right now. And we mustn't forget there are other global challenges. And that's what the circular economy tries to get us to think about and tries to get us to balance, not just the economics, not just the environmental impacts, not just the business impacts, but also the household, the individual, and the community impacts as well. So, time's running out. Well, not literally so much for me because I've only got 3 minutes, but time is running out on a global basis as well. We've got this pandemic, and there is still a very serious impact of that pandemic. So I hope you all remain and stay safe and well, and adhere to public health advice as far as possible. But there is a climate challenge. There is an economic challenge, of course. We're seeing the impact of that right now as we speak with COVID. How can we move beyond that? So I gave you I gave you six numbers at the beginning, and I asked you a question, if you remember. Remember the question? What does 4, 5, and 6 have to do with 3, 2, and 1? Now, it's not a countdown, but just to finish off, here are the answers. And I'm not sure what's happened, what your responses are, but here we go. I think we need to do, first of all, 4 things. We need to look at how we can redesign cities, how we can rejuvenate community initiatives to keep those going, and how we can reduce household consumption and reuse our assets. We need to look for these opportunities in 5 places. We need to look for these opportunities in areas which we haven't really even touched yet. Finance and banking, to realize value a lot better, for example. Healthcare, we know. How can we reduce the plastic waste burden in healthcare? It's important that we have healthcare devices which are based upon plastic, but that causes a downstream impact on plastic waste. How can we ensure that we don't waste food in important vital settings, such as in schools? And there's a piece of work I'm about to start with colleagues from several other universities, including University of York, University of Leeds, University of Bath, and Newcastle, as well as Bradford Institute for Health Research, on looking at how food impacts primary care education. The other area to look at is clothing and the rise of so-called slow, not fast fashion, because there's a lot of wastage in the clothing industry as well. And the last bit there is in terms of our consumption behaviors. Time's running out, so I'll just skip through the other couple of numbers there. So I got up to 5. The other item I said was 6. So how can we do that? I think there's 6 ways we can do that. I think we can build resilience in our economic system. We need to teach people a lot more about economics as well. And I think that means that we have to think about how systems are created, our economic systems, our community systems. We have to be aware of the communities that we live in. We have to make sure that we balance that, make all of these initiatives sustainable. And I haven't mentioned the word sustainability yet, but sustainability means to maintain something. So we need to maintain our focus on changed and progressive positive change. And we need to use technology for good. And the last 3 numbers, the 3, 2, and the 1, are as follows. We can do this if we use 3 key resources. If we use people in terms of communities, processes in terms of initiatives, and technologies, as I've already mentioned. We only need to do 2 actions, though. And one is we need to connect people. People are the most important resource we've got now. And actually, as a circular economy concept, that is what's going to help drive change in the economic system. And we also need to commit and have a pledge to change. And the last thing I want to leave you with is that we only really need one outcome. And that one outcome is to have a new economy, a new type of economy. Now, that doesn't mean that we are going to get there overnight. It's going to take time. But the concept behind a circular economy may well help to propel us out of the global pandemic, may well help to propel us out of COVID-19 situation if we can change how we look at things. And on that basis, I want to bring this session to a close. I thank you for your time. I think we've got a few responses on Slido in response to my key issues are, and it's great to see that we've got some key things coming up: education, poverty. Yes, conflict is on there as well. Disunity, injustice, greed, capitalism as well. Very important points. I'm just going to release the third and final question to you whilst we move to the Q&A part of the session this afternoon, which is, what can we do to make our economic system work better? I may have given you some answers, the 4, 5, and 6, and the 3, 2, and 1, but I'm interested in your thoughts. So thank you for your time, and I will hand back now to Dr. Aziz Hafiz and the team, and happy to take your questions. So thank you. Over to you, colleagues, and indeed over to you for questions and maybe some answers.
Professor Sharif, thank you very much. That was truly an inspiring and enlightening presentation. I, for one, definitely took on board a lot of new concepts there, particularly with the humanitarian hat on. So, without further ado, we have questions piling in from around the world. I'll try to put them to you as best I can in these final 15 minutes that we have. So, the question that we have come to us is this, and I'll read it out to you. An estimated 20% of the total food that is produced is actually lost or wasted in the continent of Europe. And the questioner asks, is legislation enough to eradicate this, or do individuals need to do more?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a really important one. And just to say, actually, this is one area that I do a lot of research in with colleagues at University of Bradford and in fact around the world. So food waste and the idea of food security very closely linked to water security and energy security, as you know, and clearly, charities such as Humanity First do a lot of work in this area to ensure the safe and accessible supply of these vital resources. The short answer is that legislation isn't enough. It is down to individuals, households, definitely, but also companies and organizations, the entire supply chain, to deal with this issue of food waste. But I just want to clarify one important point, and it's something that I learned very, very early on when starting this research with colleagues at University of Bradford and elsewhere. There's a distinction between food loss and food waste. Food loss is unintentional. So, for example, you may get a bad harvest, or there might be bad weather, and you may lose crops. Now, that is clearly outside of your hands. So loss is usually associated with unintended or external factors which you can't control. But food waste is something that we control. So thinking about, for example, portion size. And one thing in the research that we did, myself and colleagues did, was around food portions. Now, we're all fairly, I guess, well fed in various parts of the world. But just consider this. We should be, and I'm using my fists here, you can see, we should be really eating no more than a fistful of food at our key meal times. Now, that's very challenging in many parts of the world. You might not even get that much food in parts of the world. But in most parts of the developed world, we get a lot more than a fistful of food. We're very lucky. But we have to think about food waste, and that really is down to, this question is a good one because it's actually down to our individual behaviors. Legislation can help, but action and behavior change can help a lot more. But that's a complicated road, that's a complex road. So it's something we have to continue work and improve on. So I hope that answered that question.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll go straight on to the next one, which is close to our heart here at Humanity First. The questioner asks, what role can charities and NGOs around the world play in actually supporting the concept of a circular economy?
Thank you. Again, a really good question. I think one of the things that I've seen in another, as it happens, associated area of research interest, which is around humanitarian logistics and humanitarian supply chains, for example, in terms of refugee camps, but also in terms of what they call complex emergencies. Usually we define a complex emergency where there's a conflict zone and when there is humanitarian aid which is being supplied to that conflict zone, or where there's a natural disaster where there's lots of competing demands for either food or healthcare or energy or even education, of course. Now, in terms of humanitarian organizations and NGOs, the challenge with providing humanitarian support is most humanitarian support is entirely correctly emergency support. Humanitarian aid and humanitarian organizations go into one of these challenging situations very rapidly, providing food, providing healthcare, providing security, and then they leave quite soon after that, or they might stay a bit longer. But of course, there is always a waste impact of their intervention. Plastic bottles is a good one, for example, providing safe, clean water. There's a lot of plastic piping that's used in providing water supplies, for example, but also in terms of food supplies. Grain comes in, now it comes in sustainable packaging, but previously may not have come in sustainable packaging. In the 1980s, it was probably more likely to come in some sort of polymer-based sack rather than a more organic type of material. So the challenge for NGOs and humanitarian organizations is to look at their waste footprint whilst they're trying to help those communities. What you don't want to happen, of course, is to have an unintended consequence of a humanitarian aid organization leaving behind a waste situation for the very community they're trying to help. Now, sometimes that's unavoidable because you might be in a complex environment, either in a conflict or you might be in a hazardous natural environment. If you're in an earthquake or if you're in a flood zone, it's very difficult to manage waste impacts. You're trying to actually save lives and trying to keep alive as well. But I think humanitarian organizations can do a lot in terms of looking at the value of the assets that they use, making sure that they don't lose and waste those, and that is a challenging thing to do when you're dealing with emergency situations, which is what happens obviously a lot of the time. But there's certainly a lot of scope for development in that area, innovation. And again, I know colleagues in other parts of Europe and around the world are actively looking at how humanitarian organizations can have less of an impact upon the environment when they assist in these emergency situations.
Thank you. I mean, you touched on humanitarian logistics, and I know it's an area that you have researched on. In the crisis that we face at the moment, where clearly air travel has been severely impeded to contain the virus, are there any lessons there or anything that we can take on board in terms of humanitarian logistics? Clearly, there's lots of humanitarian crises ongoing at the moment, and they will be impacted and are being impacted in terms of how the supply chains are impacted due to the current situation that we find ourselves in.
So this is actually the answer to this one, if I can give an answer, is actually based upon circular economy principles, in fact. So if we're not able to provide aid from overseas because of transportation logistics challenges due to COVID, then what we have to try and do is try and work out how we can use local resources to assist wherever we can. And that's really a circular economy concept. Circular economy is about using resources locally. It's what we call looping. And if you have that looping of resources, it means that, for example, there might be even a neighbor who can help out, or somebody in the community or in the locale who may have access to food, water, energy, or healthcare that they may be able to provide immediately. There is always a challenge with any with any humanitarian aid situation that we will wait for the cavalry to come. We will wait for help to come from outside. But as we've seen with COVID and as we've seen with the global pandemic, communities and individuals and even households are really, really resilient. I'm glad to say, and we can take heart from the fact that a lot of the support, a lot of the challenge as well that we might have in supplying aid overseas can actually be mitigated by looking for local provisions, local supplies, if available. Of course, it may not always be the case, but we can use a circular economy concept of looping, as I said, using resources that are close by, that means searching out, and that means some effort as well. But this is where I think humanitarian organizations such as Humanity First, but also Médecins Sans Frontières, Red Cross, Red Crescent, Oxfam, and NGOs and paranational organizations such as United Nations, they really have those links in country, and they can actually identify, and I know they have done in previous emergency situations, they have identified local resources, local support that can help people in crisis. And that's a really good, powerful thing. And we're seeing evidence of that even in the pandemic situation we're in now. So I think localism, what they define localism and local use of resources, is going to become more and more important. The key thing with this is we mustn't forget how to do this. When things get better and we might return to doing lots more air travel, we might forget everything that we've done so far. So we mustn't forget. We have to learn from how we're using resources now and actually maintain some of that. So my only real response to that question is, don't forget how you're doing things now. Use local resources as much as you can. And there is lots of expertise and support out there. So search that out as much as you can as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If I can follow on from, you mentioned localization, and the UN and the global humanitarian community in their concept of the Grand Bargain a few years ago talked about localization as the key in terms of humanitarian delivery. And from what you've said, there's clear linkage there to the circular economy. This takes me on to the next question, and I'd like your thoughts on that. You've said that the global humanitarian world is looking at that as well. And the question asks, how might we create strong leaders and leadership in multinational and global organizations, as well as charities, to help drive this holistic sustainability agenda?
So this is an easier question for an academic or a professor at any rate, which is education. I actually mentioned this earlier on, where I talked about making sure that we understand even the simple things. I say simple, some people might not think it's simple. Make sure we understand economics. We're talking about circular economy, but do we actually understand economics? And here's a question that I always have for my students who come to the University of Bradford to study on our MBA, online MBA in circular economy. I ask them, well, do you actually know anything about economics? First of all, do you know about supply and demand? Do you know about meeting people's needs? Because without that, you can't move forward. So it's not a prerequisite, but it's certainly very, very useful. And the same is true for leadership potential. I think this is about education. This is about, I mentioned before as well, connecting the dots, being aware of the world around us. I mentioned the words of Jay Forrester, professor from MIT many years ago, who said these things. The world around us is based upon our own mental model about how we see things, but we need to share the idea. What he was trying to say there was we need to share that view of the world with others, and that is actually the job of leadership. And as a business school of management in the University of Bradford, this is clearly something we teach on our programs as well to students. And we're saying this all the time to our students. Share your ideas, share your vision, share your thoughts, explain how you see the world. That is actually the job of leadership. And I think that is, for me anyway, that is one very, very important thing that helps to push and make positive change. We have to share and collaborate the views of the world that we have in our own minds, so we can shape that new world for others as well.
Thank you, Professor Sharif. Again, the next questioner, I'm trying to, let's put some key questions to you as we reach the final 2 or 3 minutes. If I can put to you, it's probably linked to the previous question. The questioner asks, how can we embed crucial and innovative systems thinking in organizations, especially charities?
Very nice question. Thank you for that one. Systems thinking is, and again, one of my, and by the way, these are not plant questions. I didn't know these questions were coming, so it just is very fortuitous. Systems thinking is one of my areas of interest as well. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reach over my shoulder now. So this is live. I'm going to pull out 2 books. And so, one book that I always turn to is, and you can see I've got post-it notes in here, is Peter Singer's book on the fifth discipline. Some of you might know this book, but this is the idea of how we can, again, how do we view the world? How do we look at things? So understanding and thinking in systems is really important. So again, this is about education, but this is called the fifth discipline for a reason. There, we may have other skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, making sense of the world, but there's another discipline, and that's a discipline of thinking. And there's another very nice book as well, which I always refer to. Whoops, there's my book stand collapsing behind me there. But it's another one by Peter Singer, and it's an interesting one. It's a very provocative title, but here's a book that I look at a few times, and you can see the post-it notes there, The Necessary Revolution. And that, if you can see in the title, the subtitle, if I can hold it closer, you might be able to see it, if I can get it to the right angle or not. It says there, I'll read it out for you, how individuals and organizations are working together to create a sustainable world. Now, these are very old, again, I say they're old books. These are ideas from the early 2000s, and we're now into 2020. But these concepts are perennial. They're forever, I think, and they're some very, very powerful concepts in there. So I do think that systems thinking, understanding how systems work, and understanding how the relationships between our human world, the natural world, and the world that we've created, this technological world. How am I connected with you all this afternoon? Is by technology, right? So understanding how all those things are connected is really important. And systems thinking provides us with the tools to think in that way. So I'm a real advocate for systems thinking. I've used it a lot, as I've mentioned in my research. I try and get it across in talks like today. And I know that my colleagues at University of Bradford, in many different disciplines, not just business and management, but engineering, health sciences, life sciences as well, also try and push our students, the companies that we work with, think in a different way, change your perspective. And I think that's the beauty for me of a systems thinking approach. Here we are.
Thank you very much. And time has rapidly moved on. Professor Sharif, I can't thank you enough. Time has flown, and we reached the final few minutes of today's session. It clearly has been quite an eye-opener for many of us, myself included. We've not been able to go through all the questions. My apologies to the viewers. We're able to show now the results of some of the questions that were posed earlier.
Yep.
Room to put those on your screen, so they'll be able to see. You should be able to see on your screens right now. And also to let you know that the final question will still be open over the coming few days. So I would ask you all to continue putting your thoughts on that question, and the Slido poll for the final question will still be open over the coming few days. So to conclude, Professor Sharif, I'd like to thank you for spending your valuable time, taking your valuable time out from your valuable time to spend with us, and share with us your unique insight into this. Ladies and gentlemen from across the world, thank you very much for joining. Just to let you know that stay tuned to our website on hfuk.org, and we will join you again in 2 weeks' time on Saturday, the 18th of July, where we'll be joined by the Chief Executive of Evidence Aid, Ben Taylor, who will be sharing with us his thoughts about the use of evidence across the humanitarian sector during this particular COVID crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.